I still remember the exact moment everything started. Not when Luke kissed me. Not when he looked at me differently. Not even when I realized I was falling for him. It started the day my best friend told me his older brother was coming home from the army. You remember Luke, right? My friend Ethan asked while we were shooting hoops at the park. I nearly missed the ball. Of course I remembered Luke. Everyone remembered Luke. When Ethan and I were kids, Luke was the cool older brother who could do everything. He was 4 years older than us, taller, stronger, and somehow always confident without being arrogant. While Ethan and I spent summers playing video games and riding bikes, Luke was teaching himself how to fix cars, lifting weights in the garage, and planning his future. Then, after high school, he enlisted. That had been almost 6 years ago. He's coming back for good? I asked, trying to sound casual. Ethan nodded. Yeah, his contract's finally over. He's moving back next week. For some reason, my stomach tightened. I hadn't seen Luke in years. Sure, I'd occasionally see photos on Ethan's social media. Pictures of Luke in uniform. Pictures overseas. Pictures standing with other soldiers. But photos weren't the same thing. The Luke I remembered was basically frozen in my mind as a 20-year-old guy with messy brown hair and an easy smile. Now he was 26. A grown man. Mom's already driving everyone crazy. Ethan laughed. She's planning some huge welcome home barbecue. I smiled. Sounds about right. But the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Luke was coming home. And for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. A week later, Ethan's family hosted the barbecue. The entire neighborhood seemed to show up. By the time I arrived, the backyard was packed with people. Music played from speakers. Kids ran through sprinklers. Adults stood around talking near the grill. I spotted Ethan immediately. "Garrett!" he shouted. I waved and made my way through the crowd. "You made it." "Barely. Parking was impossible." "Tell me about it." We spent a few minutes catching up before I finally asked the question I'd been trying not to ask. "So?" Ethan smirked. "So? Where's Luke?" His grin widened. "Knew you'd ask." I rolled my eyes. "Shut up." Before he could answer, a familiar voice came from behind us. "Garrett." I froze. The voice was deeper than I remembered. Older. I turned around and immediately forgot what I was going to say. Luke stood only a few feet away. For a second, I genuinely didn't recognize him. The skinny older brother I remembered was gone. In his place stood someone broader, taller, and far more intimidating than I expected. His shoulders looked twice as wide. His arms were covered by a fitted dark t-shirt. His hair was shorter now, cleaner, and somehow he looked older and younger at the same time. More mature, more confident. His eyes locked onto mine. Then he smiled, and suddenly I recognized him. There he was, the same Luke, just different. "Wow," I said before I could stop myself. Luke laughed. "That's quite the greeting." Heat rushed into my face. "I mean, sorry, it's just been a while. 6 years. Yeah. Good to see you, Garrett." He stepped forward and pulled me into a quick hug. The gesture was completely normal, friendly, nothing unusual. Yet somehow my heart immediately forgot how to function. When he stepped back, I was grateful nobody seemed to notice how flustered I felt. "You're taller," I said. Luke raised an eyebrow. "I'm pretty sure I was already taller than you." Ethan burst out laughing. "Still is." "Thanks, Ethan. Anytime." For the next hour, we mostly hung around the backyard talking. Luke told stories about places he'd been, people he'd met, things he'd experienced. Nothing overly dramatic, just enough to make it obvious he'd lived a lot more life than either Ethan or I had. At one point, I noticed myself just listening, watching, the way he spoke, the way he laughed, the way everyone naturally paid attention whenever he started talking. And I hated how attractive I found all of it. I thought I'd grown out of stupid crushes years ago. Apparently not. As evening approached, the crowd slowly started thinning out. I helped Ethan clean up tables while his parents packed leftovers. Luke was carrying coolers back into the garage when Ethan suddenly checked his phone. "Oh crap. What?" I asked. "My girlfriend's car died." Luke looked over. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, sort of." Ethan sighed. "She's stranded across town." You need a ride? I need to go get her. Luke nodded. Then go. Ethan glanced between us. Then a weird smile appeared on his face. I've got an idea. Immediately, I didn't trust that smile. That's never good. Relax. He pointed toward Luke. Garrett, can you help him finish cleaning up? I frowned. That's your job. And now it's yours. Traitor. Ethan laughed. Love you too. 10 minutes later, he was gone, leaving me alone with Luke. The silence wasn't awkward. At least not for him. For me, it was a completely different story. Luke carried another folding table toward the garage. Need a hand? I asked. Sure. We lifted it together. As we walked, Luke glanced over. So what have you been up to these days? The question seemed simple, but the fact that he genuinely wanted to know caught me off guard. We talked while we worked. About my job, my apartment, life in general. And surprisingly, conversation came easily. Easier than I expected. Almost like the 6 years hadn't happened. Eventually, we finished putting everything away. The backyard was nearly empty now. The sun had disappeared below the horizon. Only a few lights remained on around the patio. Luke leaned against the garage wall and crossed his arms. You know, he said. What? You turned out pretty different than I expected. I laughed nervously. Is that good or bad? His eyes stayed on mine. Good. For some reason, that single word hit harder than it should have. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. The evening air felt strangely still. Then Luke smiled. Hey, yeah, I'm glad you're still around. My heart skipped. And for the first time since seeing him again, I had a feeling this wasn't going to be a normal summer. Over the next few weeks, I started spending more time at Ethan's house than I probably should have. At least that was the excuse I kept giving myself. I'd tell myself I was there to hang out with my best friend, to play basketball, to watch movies, to help Ethan with random projects around the house. But if I was being honest, Luke was the real reason. Ever since he'd come home from the army, he seemed to be everywhere. Working on his truck in the driveway, helping his dad with repairs around the house, running early every morning through the neighborhood. And every time I saw him, that stupid crush got a little worse. The worst part? Luke was ridiculously easy to be around. Some attractive people know they're attractive. They carry themselves differently. Luke wasn't like that. He treated everyone exactly the same. Whether it was his parents, Ethan, me, or the 80-year-old neighbor next door. He was patient, funny, genuine, which somehow made everything 10 times harder. One Saturday afternoon, I showed up at Ethan's house expecting our usual plans. Instead, I found him rushing around the kitchen. You look stressed. I am stressed. What happened? My girlfriend's parents are visiting. And apparently that's a big deal. I laughed. You'll survive. Easy for you to say. I grabbed a soda from the fridge. So what are we doing today? Ethan winced. Actually, I immediately knew I wasn't going to like whatever came next. No, I haven't said anything. You made the face. What face? The bad news face. Ethan sighed. Plans changed. Of course they did. My girlfriend wants me to spend the day with her family. I pointed toward the door. Then go. What about you? I'll find something to do. Before Ethan could answer, another voice came from the hallway. Problem. Luke walked into the kitchen carrying a toolbox. Even after several weeks, I still wasn't fully prepared for how good he looked, especially when he smiled. Apparently my brain hadn't learned anything. Ethan's abandoning me, I said. Luke glanced at his brother. Again. Hey, it's true. Ethan threw his hands up. I can't win here. Luke laughed. Then he looked at me. I'm heading out to pick up supplies. Okay. You can come if you want. The invitation caught me completely off guard. What? Luke shrugged. I'm rebuilding the deck behind the garage. Sounds exciting. It won't be. I appreciate the honesty. A grin spread across his face. Still want to come? I looked toward Ethan. He was already smirking. Traitor. I guess. Great. And just like that, my entire day changed. The drive started normally enough. Luke's truck smelled faintly like sawdust and coffee. Country music played quietly through the speakers. For the first few minutes, neither of us talked much. Then Luke broke the silence. So, you still nervous around me? I nearly choked. What? His grin widened. I knew it. Knew what? You get nervous. No, I don't. Garrett. I don't. Luke laughed. You absolutely do. I stared out the window. This was humiliating. You're imagining things. Sure. You are. Whatever helps you sleep at night. I groaned. Luke looked far too pleased with himself. The hardware store trip took almost 2 hours. Mostly because Luke somehow knew half the employees. Every few minutes someone stopped him to talk. By the time we loaded the truck with lumber and supplies, I was exhausted. Luke tossed the last bundle into the truck bed. You hungry? Always. Good. We ended up at a small diner near the edge of town. The kind of place with old booths and faded photographs on the walls. As soon as we sat down, conversation became surprisingly easy again. We talked about everything. Movies, travel, school, work, life. The more we talked, the more I realized how much Luke had changed. The confident older brother I remembered was still there. But there was something calmer about him now. More thoughtful, like he'd learned what actually mattered. At one point, he asked about dating. I immediately regretted taking a sip of water. Anyone special? He asked casually. I nearly inhaled the drink. Luke laughed. You okay? Fine. You don't look fine. I set the glass down. No one special. His expression stayed neutral. What about you? Luke leaned back. Nope. Really? Really? That surprised me. I figured someone like Luke would have no trouble dating. Apparently he noticed my confusion. What? Nothing. You made a face. I did not. You absolutely did. I groaned. Apparently it ran in the family. Luke smiled. Then, for a brief moment, his expression softened. Honestly, I've just been focused on figuring out what's next. The answer seemed genuine, and somehow it made him even more attractive, which was deeply unfair. By the time we returned to his house, the sun was beginning to set. We spent the next couple hours working on the deck. Well, Luke worked. I mostly handed him tools and tried not to stare at him. Unfortunately, I wasn't very successful. At one point, he caught me watching. I immediately looked away. Luke didn't say anything, but I definitely saw him trying not to smile. As darkness settled over the yard, we finally packed everything up. My arms were sore, my clothes were dirty, and somehow I'd had one of the best days I'd experienced in months. Luke sat down on the edge of the unfinished deck. You survived. Barely. You complain a lot. I earned it. He laughed. The sound echoed through the quiet backyard. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The neighborhood was peaceful. Warm summer air drifted through the trees. Felt strangely comfortable. Then Luke looked over. You know something? What? I'm glad Ethan ditched you today. I raised an eyebrow. That's rude. I mean it. Why? His gaze lingered on mine a second longer than usual. Because I got to know you better. My stomach immediately tightened. Luke looked away first, almost as if he'd realized how that sounded. The silence that followed felt different. Not awkward, just heavier somehow. More noticeable. Eventually I stood. I should probably head home. Probably. Neither of us moved immediately. Then Luke stood too. I'll walk you out. The trip to my car took less than a minute. Yet somehow it felt too short. When I reached the driver's door, I turned toward him. Thanks for today. Anytime. I mean it. I know. For a second neither of us said anything. Then Luke smiled. The same warm smile that always seemed to destroy my ability to think clearly. See you tomorrow, Garrett. Tomorrow. Not sometime. Not later. Tomorrow. As if he already expected to see me again. And the embarrassing part? I was already looking forward to it. The problem with having a crush on someone is that eventually you start looking for signs. Little things. Small moments. Tiny details that probably mean absolutely nothing. And that's exactly what I started doing with Luke. Every smile. Every glance. Every joke. Every text message. My brain analyzed all of it. Which was incredibly stupid. Because Luke was just being nice. That was the logical explanation. The safe explanation. The explanation I repeated to myself every night. Unfortunately, logic wasn't winning. About a week later, Ethan invited me over for a movie night. By the time I arrived, the living room was already full. A few of Ethan's friends were there. His girlfriend, 2 neighbors, even Luke, of course. The moment I walked through the door, Luke looked up from the couch. There he is. My heart immediately betrayed me. Hey! He pointed toward the empty seat beside him. Saved you a spot. I nearly walked into a wall. Nobody else seemed to notice, but Ethan definitely did. The idiot smirked from across the room. I made a mental note to get revenge later. The movie itself wasn't important. I couldn't tell you what it was about. Couldn't tell you who starred in it. Couldn't tell you how it ended. Because my attention was completely ruined. Luke sat beside me the entire time. Close enough that our shoulders occasionally brushed. Close enough that I was painfully aware of every movement. At one point, everyone laughed at something on screen. I turned my head at the exact same moment Luke did. For a second, we were inches apart. His eyes met mine. Neither of us looked away immediately. Then Ethan loudly threw popcorn across the room. The moment vanished. But somehow it stayed in my head long after the movie ended. Around midnight, everyone started leaving. One by one, cars disappeared down the street. Eventually, only 4 people remained. Me, Luke, Ethan, and Ethan's girlfriend. Then Ethan received a phone call. A few minutes later, he groaned dramatically. No. His girlfriend looked over. What happened? My mom forgot she volunteered for some church thing tomorrow. So she needs help setting everything up at 6 in the morning. I laughed. Sounds like your problem. It is my problem. He stood. Then he looked toward Luke. Can Garrett stay here tonight? I blinked. What? Ethan shrugged. It's late. I can drive home. You could. Then why would I stay here? Before Ethan answered, his girlfriend grabbed his arm. We need to leave. What? Now. But. Now. Something passed between them. Some silent conversation. Then Ethan sighed dramatically. Fine. He looked at me. Stay if you want. And just like that, they were gone, leaving Luke and me alone. Again. I was starting to suspect Ethan was doing this on purpose. The house felt unusually quiet. Luke gathered empty soda cans from the coffee table. You staying? I hesitated. Maybe. Guest room's free. Good to know. For some reason, neither of us moved. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. Actually, it was becoming familiar. Luke tossed the last can into a trash bag. Then he looked at me. Want a beer? Sure. 10 minutes later, we were sitting on the back deck. Just the 2 of us. The summer air felt warm and still. Crickets chirped somewhere beyond the fence. The neighborhood had mostly gone to sleep. Felt peaceful. Almost private. We talked for nearly 2 hours. About everything. About nothing. Stories from high school. Embarrassing memories. Future plans. At some point I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd connected with someone this easily. Luke listened when I spoke. Actually listened. Not the fake kind. Not the polite kind. The real kind. And every time he looked at me, I felt like I mattered. Which was dangerous. Very dangerous. Around 1 in the morning, Luke stretched and stood. I'm exhausted. Army life made you old. Careful. I laughed. He pointed toward the house. Come on. We headed inside. The lights downstairs were already off. Only a small lamp illuminated the hallway. Luke stopped near the stairs. Guest room's ready. Thanks. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Luke smiled. Good night, Garrett. Night. I started toward the guest room. Then his voice stopped me. Hey. I turned around. Yeah. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something. Something important. Instead, he shook his head. Nothing. I smiled. Good night, Luke. The guest room was comfortable enough. But sleep refused to come. I spent nearly an hour staring at the ceiling. Thinking about Luke. Thinking about the way he'd looked at me. Thinking about absolutely everything. Eventually, I drifted off. A loud crash woke me. I sat upright immediately. For a second, I had no idea where I was. Then I remembered. Ethan's house. Luke's house. The hallway outside was dark. Another noise echoed downstairs. My heart jumped. Someone was definitely awake. Curiosity got the better of me. I quietly opened the bedroom door. A faint light glowed from the kitchen. As I approached, I found Luke standing near the refrigerator, barefoot, wearing gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt. His hair was messy from sleep, and somehow that simple sight nearly destroyed me. Luke looked up. "You scared the hell out of me." I laughed quietly. "You dropped something. A bowl. Impressive. Thanks." He grinned, then held up a carton. "Want ice cream?" I stared at him. "It's 2 in the morning. That's not a no." 5 minutes later, we were sitting at the kitchen counter eating ice cream straight from the container, like a pair of idiots, and somehow it felt perfect. Luke shook his head. "If my mom saw this, she'd kill us." "Probably. But worth it." I laughed. Luke smiled. Then his expression softened. The kitchen suddenly felt very quiet, very small. His eyes stayed on mine, longer than normal, long enough that my pulse started racing. Neither of us looked away. For one impossible second, it felt like the entire world disappeared. Just me and him. Then Luke blinked. The moment broke. He looked down at the ice cream. I looked anywhere else, and neither of us mentioned what had just happened. But as I finally headed back to bed that night, one thought kept repeating in my head. Maybe I wasn't imagining everything after all. The next morning, I woke up convinced I'd imagined the entire thing. The look in Luke's eyes, the weird tension in the kitchen, the feeling that something had shifted between us. By breakfast, I'd almost talked myself into believing it. Almost. Then Luke walked into the kitchen and immediately looked at me, not casually, not accidentally, directly, like he'd been looking for me. "Morning." My stomach tightened. "Morning." He smiled, and for some reason that smile felt different now, like we were both remembering something neither of us had mentioned. The following week became dangerous. Not because anything happened, because nothing happened. Luke and I kept spending time together, more than before. Enough that Ethan eventually noticed. Actually, he noticed immediately. He just waited until we were alone. We were helping him move furniture one afternoon when he suddenly said, "So." I already hated where this was going. "So? You and Luke." I almost dropped the chair I was carrying. "What about me and Luke?" Ethan's grin appeared instantly. "There it is." "There what is?" "The panic." "I'm not panicking." "You totally are." I groaned. "I hate you." "Love you too." Then he laughed and walked away, leaving me annoyed and slightly concerned. A few days later, Luke asked if I wanted to go fishing. Fishing. Something I had literally never done voluntarily. Yet somehow my answer came out immediately. "Sure." Luke laughed. "You don't know anything about fishing, do you?" "No." "Not even a little?" "Nope." "Perfect." We left before sunrise. The sky was still dark when he picked me up. I climbed into his truck carrying coffee and approximately zero fishing knowledge. Luke glanced over. "You look tired." "It's 5 in the morning." "It's peaceful at 5 in the morning." "It's criminal at 5 in the morning." He laughed so hard he nearly missed a turn. The lake was beautiful, quiet, still. The surface looked like glass beneath the early morning sunlight. I immediately understood why people liked coming here. What I didn't understand was fishing. An entire hour passed. Luke caught 3 fish. I caught absolutely nothing. "You're terrible at this." "I'm aware." Luke grinned. "Want help?" "No." "You clearly need help." "I'll figure it out." 5 minutes later, my line got tangled. Luke nearly fell out of the boat laughing. Eventually, he moved beside me. "Okay. I don't need your pity." "You absolutely do." His shoulder brushed mine as he reached for the fishing rod. A simple movement, completely innocent. Yet my heart instantly started misbehaving. Luke seemed oblivious. Or maybe he wasn't. I honestly couldn't tell anymore. His hand settled over mine. "Like this." The words were simple, but hearing them while he stood that close made concentrating impossible. "Garrett." "What?" "You're not listening." "I am." "You haven't looked at the fishing rod once." I stared at the lake. Luke laughed again, and somehow that felt worse. We ended up staying at the lake all afternoon, talking, relaxing, doing absolutely nothing important. And honestly, It was one of the best days I'd had all year. The problem was that I wasn't just crushing on Luke anymore. I genuinely liked him, as a person, as a friend, which made everything infinitely more complicated. Because if things went wrong, I wouldn't just lose a crush, I'd lose him. The drive home was quieter, comfortable, the kind of silence that only exists when two people genuinely enjoy each other's company. At one point Luke glanced over. "You okay?" "Yeah." "You got quiet." I smiled. "Just thinking. Dangerous." "Probably." His eyes lingered on me for a moment, then returned to the road, but the corner of his mouth lifted slightly, like he was fighting a smile. That evening, we pulled into his driveway just as the sun was setting. The sky was painted orange and gold. For a few seconds, neither of us got out. Luke tapped the steering wheel, then looked at me. "I had fun today." The words shouldn't have mattered, but they did. A lot. "Me too." His smile appeared again. That same smile. The one that always made my chest feel too tight. Then his expression grew more serious. "Can I ask you something?" My pulse immediately accelerated. "Sure." Luke hesitated. Actually hesitated, which was unusual for him. Then he finally spoke. "Why do you always look away?" I froze. "What?" "When I catch you staring." Every muscle in my body stopped working. "Oh, yeah." I looked out the windshield. Anywhere except at him. Luke waited, patiently, which somehow made it worse. "I don't know." "That's not true." His voice was soft, gentle, not teasing, not joking, just honest. And suddenly I realized he genuinely wanted an answer. The problem was that I couldn't give him one. Not the real one. Not yet. "I guess," I said slowly. "What?" I swallowed. "You make me nervous." The admission hung between us. Luke stared at me. For 1 second, 2, 3. Then something changed in his expression. Something warm. Something that made my heartbeat explode. Instead of laughing, instead of teasing, he smiled. A small, genuine smile. "Good." I blinked. "What?" Luke looked away, almost like he'd said too much. "Nothing." My heart nearly stopped. Because for the first time since he'd come home, I wasn't the only one looking nervous. And suddenly I started wondering if maybe, just maybe, Luke had been feeling this too. After that conversation in the truck, everything changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but enough that I noticed. Enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. Because once Luke admitted I made him nervous too, even indirectly, it became impossible to pretend nothing was happening. The problem was that neither of us seemed willing to take the next step. So we kept circling around it, getting closer, testing boundaries, acting like friends while both of us seemed increasingly aware of something more. A few nights later, Ethan invited several people over for a bonfire. The backyard quickly filled with folding chairs, coolers, and enough snacks to feed a small army. I arrived just before sunset, and immediately spotted Luke. Of course, he was helping his dad stack firewood near the pit. When he noticed me walking through the gate, his face brightened instantly. Not dramatically, just enough. But I noticed, and apparently so did Ethan. The idiot looked between us and nearly started laughing. I made a mental note to throw him into the fire later. As darkness settled in, everyone gathered around the flames. Stories were told. Jokes were shared. People drifted between conversations. For most of the evening, everything felt normal. Then the seating situation became a problem. Because somehow, through circumstances that were definitely not accidental, I ended up beside Luke. Again, our chairs were close enough that our arms occasionally touched. Every time it happened, neither of us moved away, which wasn't helping my sanity at all. Around 10 o'clock, people started splitting into smaller groups. Some stayed near the fire. Others wandered into the house. A few started playing games on the patio. Eventually, Ethan disappeared with his girlfriend, leaving Luke and me sitting together near the dying fire. The conversation slowed. Not awkwardly, comfortably. The flames crackled softly. Night insects hummed in the distance. For a while, we simply watched the fire. Then Luke spoke. "Can I tell you something?" I looked over. "Sure." He stared into the flames. "When I was overseas." His voice was quieter than usual. I used to think about home a lot. I nodded. That makes sense. Not just the place. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. Luke finally looked at me. The people. For a second, neither of us spoke. The firelight reflected in his eyes. I missed my family, he continued. Ethan. My parents. I listened quietly. Then he smiled slightly. And you. My heart completely forgot how to function. What? Luke laughed softly. You heard me. I couldn't find words. Luke looked away again, almost embarrassed. I don't know. He rubbed the back of his neck. Whenever Ethan called, you'd usually be around. I remembered that. Video calls, holiday messages, quick check-ins. Nothing important. At least that's what I'd thought. You were familiar, Luke said. Something normal. The warmth spreading through my chest was almost overwhelming, because somehow that meant more than I could explain. Eventually the fire burned low. Most people had already left. The backyard had become quiet again. Luke stood and stretched. I should probably clean this up. I'll help. Together we started gathering chairs. The same way we always seemed to end up doing things together. Working side by side. Talking about nothing. Enjoying it anyway. At one point we both reached for the same chair. Our hands touched. A simple accident. Nothing unusual. Yet neither of us pulled away immediately. The moment lasted maybe 2 seconds. 3 at most. But it felt much longer. Luke's eyes met mine. The air suddenly felt very still. Very quiet. Like the entire world had paused. Then a car horn sounded somewhere down the street. The moment shattered. We both stepped back. Neither of us said anything. But my pulse refused to slow down. Later that night, after everything was cleaned up, Luke walked me to my car. Something that had become strangely routine. We stopped beside the driver's door. The porch light cast soft shadows across the driveway. Neither of us seemed eager to leave. You coming over tomorrow? Luke asked. Probably. He smiled. Good. There it was again. That word. Good. Simple. Yet somehow meaningful every time he said it. I opened the car door, then paused, because Luke was still standing there, still looking at me. The silence stretched. Neither of us moved. And for one impossible second, I thought he might actually. Garrett! Ethan's voice exploded from the front porch. Both of us jumped. What? I shouted. Ethan grinned like a maniac. You forgot your hoodie. I wanted to strangle him. Luke looked away, laughing. And just like that, whatever had almost happened disappeared. The next morning, I woke up annoyed, because now I knew for sure. Something was happening. Not just in my head. Not imagined. Not wishful thinking. Real. The problem was that neither of us seemed brave enough to acknowledge it. And honestly, I wasn't sure how much longer I could pretend, because every day with Luke made me like him more. Every conversation, every smile, every stupid fishing trip. And the closer we got, the harder it became to hide. Especially when it was starting to feel like Luke wasn't hiding much anymore either. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday. Not because anything dramatic happened. Not because someone confessed feelings. Not because there was some movie-style moment. It happened because Luke called me. And for some reason, hearing his name appear on my phone made my heart nearly stop. I answered immediately. Hello. Busy. His voice sounded unusually tired. A little. Why? There was a brief pause. Then, want to help me with something? I smiled before I could stop myself. Sure. An hour later, I was pulling into his driveway. Rain drummed softly against my windshield. The sky was gray. The entire neighborhood looked sleepy. Luke opened the front door before I even reached the porch. You came. I laughed. You literally called me. Still. Something about the way he said it made my chest feel warm. The project turned out to be simple. Luke was reorganizing the garage. Or at least that was the official reason. In reality, we spent more time talking than cleaning. Boxes moved. Shelves got sorted. Old tools found new homes. But mostly we just enjoyed being around each other. At one point Luke found an old photo album. That turned into another hour of distractions. We sat on the garage floor flipping through pictures. Most of them were from years ago. Family vacations. Birthday parties. school events. Then Luke stopped on one photo. I immediately recognized it. A camping trip. Years ago. Before he'd enlisted. Before everything changed. Ethan was there. His parents. Me. And Luke. Much younger versions of all of us. Luke stared at the photo for several seconds. Then smiled. You remember this? Yeah. You got poison ivy. I groaned. Don't remind me. You cried. I was 12. You cried a lot. I shoved his shoulder. Luke laughed. Then his smile softened. You followed me everywhere back then. My face warmed. Maybe. Definitely. He looked down at the photo again. Then quietly added. I liked that. My heart skipped. Hard. The garage suddenly felt much smaller. The rain outside became background noise. Luke was still looking at the picture. Not at me. Almost like he hadn't realized what he'd said. Or maybe he had. I honestly couldn't tell anymore. You did? I asked. His eyes finally lifted. Yeah. The answer came easily. Naturally. Without hesitation. Luke closed the photo album. Then sat back against the wall. I always thought you were different. I swallowed. Different how? He smiled slightly. In a good way. My pulse was racing now. Every instinct told me this conversation was heading somewhere important. Somewhere we'd both been avoiding. For weeks. Maybe longer. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. Felt heavy. Meaningful. Luke looked unusually serious. More serious than I'd ever seen him. Then he asked, Can I be honest? My stomach flipped. Sure. His gaze stayed locked on mine. And suddenly I couldn't breathe properly. Because I knew. I didn't know exactly what he was going to say. But I knew it mattered. A lot. When I came home. He stopped. Tried again. When I got back from the army, I expected everything to feel familiar. I listened quietly. But it didn't. His voice was calm. Thoughtful. Everything changed. I nodded. Yeah. Luke looked away briefly. Then back. Except you. The words hit me harder than anything he'd said before. Because he wasn't joking. Wasn't teasing. Wasn't being casual. He meant it. You were still you. His smile returned. Smaller this time. More vulnerable. And honestly, his eyes held mine. You were one of the things I was most excited to see again. My heartbeat became completely impossible to ignore. The garage fell silent. Neither of us looked away. Neither of us seemed willing to break whatever was happening. For weeks we danced around it. Circled it. Avoided it. Now suddenly we were standing right in front of it. And neither of us could pretend anymore. Luke exhaled slowly. Almost nervously. Which was strange. I'd never seen Luke nervous before. Not really. Then he laughed softly. You're staring again. I smiled despite myself. Maybe. Should I be worried? No. His grin appeared. Good. The tension eased slightly. But only slightly. Because the truth was still sitting there between us. Waiting. A loud crack of thunder echoed outside. Both of us glanced toward the garage door. The rain had become heavier. The world outside looked blurry through the windows. Luke stood. I should probably drive you home before it gets worse. Part of me didn't want to leave. At all. But I nodded. Okay. The drive felt different. Neither of us said much. Not because things were awkward. Because we were both thinking. Trying to process everything. Every conversation. Every moment. Every look. Everything that had brought us here. When we finally reached my apartment building, neither of us moved. The engine remained running. Rain tapped against the windshield. The streetlights reflected across the wet pavement. Luke stared forward, then finally looked at me, and this time, there was no uncertainty, no confusion, no pretending, just honesty, pure and simple. Garrett. The way he said my name made my chest tighten. Yeah. His eyes searched mine, almost like he was deciding something. Then a small smile appeared, and for the first time since he'd come home, I realized Luke wasn't trying to figure out how he felt anymore. He already knew. The only question left was whether I was ready to hear it. For a moment, neither of us moved. The rain continued falling outside. The truck's engine hummed quietly beneath us, and somehow the space between us felt smaller than ever. Luke was still looking at me. Not casually. Not like a friend. Not like Ethan's older brother. Just me and him. No distractions. No interruptions. No Ethan yelling from a porch. No excuses left. Garrett. My pulse was pounding. Yeah. Luke let out a slow breath, then laughed nervously. Actually nervous. The sight shocked me. This was Luke. The guy who always seemed confident. The guy who never looked unsure of himself. Yet right now, he looked exactly how I felt. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for weeks. My heart nearly stopped. Neither of us looked away. The entire world felt frozen. Then Luke shook his head. You know what? What? I'm tired of overthinking it. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I know the feeling. That made him laugh. And suddenly some of the tension eased. Just enough. Luke rested one arm on the steering wheel. His eyes stayed on mine. When I first came home, I thought maybe I was imagining things. I swallowed. Imagining what? You. My stomach flipped. Luke smiled. I kept noticing you. Every word hit harder than the last. The way you smiled. The way you got nervous. The way you always showed up. I stared at him, unable to think, unable to speak. Luke looked down briefly, then back at me. And the more time we spent together, his voice softened, the harder it became to ignore. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. I felt like my heart was trying to break through my ribs. Then I finally managed. So I'm not crazy? Luke laughed. No. Good. Definitely not. The smile that appeared on his face was probably my favorite thing I'd ever seen. The rain outside intensified. Neither of us seemed to care. Luke leaned back slightly, relieved, like a weight had finally disappeared. Can I ask you something? I nodded. Anything. When did this start? I immediately laughed. Luke looked confused. What? You really want to know? Yeah. I shook my head. This is embarrassing. Now I definitely want to know. I groaned, then finally admitted it. Honestly, when I was like 15, Luke burst out laughing. Oh my God. I told you it was embarrassing. You had a crush on me that long? Unfortunately, his grin became impossible to ignore. Wow. Covered my face. This conversation is over. No way. Luke, this is amazing. I couldn't stop laughing. Mostly because I was relieved. The tension, the uncertainty, the wondering. It was finally gone. Eventually, the conversation became easier, lighter. We talked about everything we'd both been avoiding. The looks, the awkward moments, the obvious excuses to spend time together. Turns out neither of us had been nearly as subtle as we thought. Not even close. At some point, Luke glanced toward my apartment building, then back at me. So, now what? I smiled. The answer came surprisingly easily. Now we stop pretending. Luke's grin returned immediately. I like that plan. Me too. For a second, neither of us moved. The moment felt important, like the beginning of something. Not dramatic, not rushed, just real. Luke reached over. His hand found mine. Simple, natural, comfortable. And somehow that small gesture meant more than any grand declaration ever could. Outside, the rain finally started slowing. The storm was passing. Neither of us seemed eager for the night to end. But eventually reality returned. Work, responsibilities, life, all the normal things waiting for us tomorrow. Luke squeezed my hand once before letting go. I should probably head home. Probably. Neither of us moved. Then we both laughed. Finally, I opened the passenger door. Cool air drifted inside. Before climbing out, I turned back toward him. Luke was already looking at me, smiling. The same smile that had completely ruined my ability to think since the day he came home. Only now everything felt different, because now I knew, and so did he. Good night, Luke. His expression softened. Good night, Garrett. As I walked toward my apartment building, I couldn't stop smiling. For weeks I'd wondered, questioned, overthought every little detail. Now there was no confusion, no uncertainty, just excitement. Because for the first time since Luke came home from the army, I wasn't wondering what might happen. I was looking forward to what came next, and somehow that felt even better. The next few weeks felt different in the best possible way. Not because everything suddenly became perfect, not because life stopped being complicated, but because Luke and I were finally honest with each other. No more guessing, no more wondering, no more pretending that every look, every smile, every excuse to spend time together was meaningless. Now we knew, and somehow that made everything easier. The first person to figure it out was Ethan, which wasn't surprising. Honestly, he had probably known before either of us. A few days after that rainy night, the three of us were sitting in the backyard. Luke had gone inside to grab drinks. The moment he disappeared through the door, Ethan turned toward me. Then he smiled. Slowly, dangerously. Oh my God. I immediately knew. What? You idiots finally figured it out. I groaned. Please stop. You finally figured it out. Ethan. I've been waiting months. 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 I buried my face in my hands. Ethan laughed so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. When Luke came back outside, he took one look at my expression and sighed. What did he do? He won't stop talking. Fair. I can hear you. Good. Ethan looked far too pleased with himself. Luke just shook his head, then sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. Natural. Comfortable. Like we'd been doing it forever. For some reason, that simple feeling meant everything. As summer continued, life settled into a rhythm. Luke found a job working with a local construction company. I kept busy with work. Ethan continued being annoying. Some things never changed. But now there was always something waiting at the end of the day. A phone call, a text, an excuse to see each other, a reason to smile. One evening near the end of summer, Luke invited me back to the lake. The same lake where I'd failed spectacularly at fishing. The same lake where we'd spent an entire day talking. Only this time, neither of us brought fishing gear. We just sat near the water as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the trees. The lake reflected the orange sky like glass. Everything felt calm, peaceful. Luke leaned back on his hands. You know. What? He smiled. This isn't how I expected things to go. I laughed. Coming home. Yeah. He looked out across the water. When I left for the army, I thought I had everything planned. And life doesn't really care about plans. I smiled. No, it doesn't. Luke looked over. His expression softened. But honestly? What? I'm glad. I felt my chest tighten. Glad? Yeah. His eyes stayed on mine. Because if everything had gone according to plan, he shook his head. I might have missed this. The words hung between us. Simple, honest, real, exactly like him. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The evening breeze drifted across the lake. The sun sank lower, and I realized something. For years, Luke had been the guy I thought about but never believed I'd have a chance with. The cool older brother. The guy who always seemed just out of reach. Yet somehow, life had brought us back to the same place. At exactly the right time. Not when I was 15. Not when he was overseas. Now, when we were both ready. Luke nudged my shoulder lightly. What are you thinking about? I smiled. How weird life is. He laughed. That's deep. I know. Very philosophical. Thank you. Luke shook his head, then smiled again. That smile. The one that started all of this. The one I'd never gotten tired of. The one I doubted I'd ever get tired of. The sun finally disappeared below the horizon. The lake darkened. Stars slowly appeared overhead. Neither of us rushed to leave. Neither of us wanted the moment to end. Eventually Luke stood and offered me his hand. I took it. He pulled me to my feet. And for a second we simply stood there together. Looking out across the water. Looking toward whatever came next. Not knowing exactly what the future would bring. But knowing we'd face it together. And honestly, that was enough. More than enough. Because sometimes the best stories don't begin with grand gestures. Sometimes they begin when someone's older brother comes home from the army and changes everything.